Hi, this is Al Tinsley, the State Compliance Specialist for highly erodible land and wetland conservation provisions for the 1985 Food Security Act. I will be talking about status reviews and the use of variances, and I will also try to explain why we are doing this. So Congress decided with the 1985 Farm Bill that farmers must show that they are properly managing their highly erodible land and their wetlands to be eligible to participate in USDA programs. So the way Congress set it up, the farmers show this in two different ways. The first is by using the AD 1026 form. This is called a self-certification. And what it means is that they use this form to indicate when they are wanting to clear land to either farm or to convert a wetland to cropland, or if they're wanting to make changes in any of their systems to where it comes in question again as to how well they're doing with controlling the erosion or protecting their wetlands. So that's what the AD 1026 form is used for. The second way is through the Food Security Act status reviews. On this slide, I wanted to show what the preamble to the 1987 final rule states. And of course, the 1987 final rule comes off the 1985 interim rule. The way this works is the legislation is passed, and then the agency makes up the regulations that will carry out the legislation or the laws passed by Congress, and then it has to go through a comment period, and then the agency makes any changes that they think need to be made, and then they issue the final rule. Rule and regulation are used interchangeably in this process, but that's what the rule is referring to, are the regulations that the agency makes in response to what bill Congress passed. So this says the department will not rely entirely on certifications in determining whether a person has produced an agricultural commodity on highly erodible land or on a converted wetland. ASCS, now FSA, will inspect annually a representative number of farms to determine whether persons are adhering to the requirements of eligibility set forth in the interim rule. So that is why we place so much emphasis on this, and we hope you all do as well. As we get into doing a status review, we want to make sure that we always understand what the big picture is. So when we're doing a status review, particularly for the highly erodible land conservation provisions, we've got to remember that the C in HELC or WC stands for conservation, not compliance. Compliance becomes a thing only when a violation is made. So unless and until compliance becomes an issue, it's to our advantage to use status reviews as an opportunity to sell the person conservation. So we should use it as an interaction with the landowner and or the farmer to maximize the conservation efforts related to soil health, cover crops, the use of wasp cobs, diversions, waterways, grazing, planning, and of course, water quality. So in situations where the producer has a good relationship with NRCS, we may just need to do a quick review and move on down the road and do another one. But if you're working with a producer who is new to the programs or that we really don't work with much, this is an excellent tool and opportunity to get that person involved deeper with NRCS and soil conservation. And so we should always treat this like an opportunity to accomplish conservation, not an inspection to be carried out. These are the variances that NRCS is responsible for administering through the status reviews. Our variances are a hodgepodge of policies found in different places in the National Food Security Act manual. So we use citations in a lot of places, not only on this PowerPoint, but whenever we're talking about these activities, try to make sense of things. So you will often need to look these up when you have a specific concern, because there are a lot of words that affect the use of these things that it's hard to cover in a single PowerPoint. So we have put out written guidance that lists all the different places you might need to look up to get a better understanding of the use of these variances. The first situation is when no codes need to be utilized. These are exemptions that are discussed without showing up as a coded activity on the status reviews. So these include sod busting with small acreage, less than 2 acres in size, often used for things like rock piles, roads, small groupings of trees, and these would receive the same variances and the same conservation plan for the adjacent field where these small places are being incorporated into. So if you got rid of a rock pile or you plowed up a road, then that would become part of the field, and that would automatically get the whatever the plan is for that field. So if you're incorporating this into a NHEL field, then you don't need to take any actions on it, even if the small area is a HEL itself. Another situation where you don't have a code is areas that are in native vegetation that are being tilled up to some degree, either completely or partially, and then interseeded with pasture vegetation, because this is not considered cropping. So as long as it stays in that use, then there is no code that would be involved with that. The production of commodities for non-commercial uses on less than 2 acres, such as home gardens, is not considered commodity production either. And so the best way to handle those, of course, is still documenting what was going on and what action you took and how they fit in with the tract. Now the code for an exempted review should be used if when you are going through the list of the tracts that are sent out and you realize that a person that has been randomly selected actually was reviewed in the last 2 years, and they got a AA or a UA variance actively applying, or use of a approved conservation system, then that does not need to be reviewed again, and they should get the EX code. Other situations would be where an RMS is being applied. The person has the tract under a self-certification crop residue management record keeping system, or NRCS has given out a widespread weather variance due to some weather activity that has resulted in that. So this code is set up to be used for the entire tract. So if every field were in this situation, then you would use the EX code. If it's simply a field or two that would qualify for this, then you would use the codes that the rest of the fields would qualify for as the tract code, and then you would make a notation that these specific fields were given the exempted review. And then, of course, we have code NN, which is a system not needed designation. And that would be used when a tract is not being used for commodity crops. The tract is both NHEL and PCNW. There's no possibility of having a wetland, or the person is not a participant. Usually when you do that, I believe you would have to pick another tract, but those are the three things that would tell you that a review is not needed. These are the variances that will require paperwork. So NRCS is responsible for administering these. So we'll just move through the PowerPoint slide here. Codes AA and UA are for actively applying for the use of an approved system. This is for situations where the conservation plan is actually being carried out. The difference between the two is if the site is having to deal with ephemeral gullies, then that would require the use of the UA instead of the AA. Both of these, even if there are ephemeral gullies, do not require a visit for the next year like you would for most of the other variances. And in fact, you wouldn't go back for 2 years because of the restriction that tracts are selected only once every 3 years, or no more than once every 3 years. So they could be selected for a visit after that. Now the codes ACAH and AM are for situations where the conservation plan is not being met, but it does meet one of these exemptions. The AC is the special conditions variance, and this is related to natural disasters such as severe weather, pest or disease damage requiring a response by the farmer or the owner outside of the plan. The AH, which is a personal hardship variance, is related to hardship upon the person that is beyond their control, such as when NRCS makes an error. The perfect example of that is how we left ephemeral gully management off of their conservation plans for a number of years. So now when we see those gullies, we have to inform the person that these are covered, these will be covered by a conservation plan. But we're going to give them this personal hardship variance because the error was made by NRCS. Other situations would be illness or death or loss of equipment or any other event that requires the program participant to make a response outside of what the conservation plan would allow. And then finally, AM is for a minor technical failure made by the program participant. The way it reads in the manual in the Code of Federal Regulations is that this is geared for new activities where a minor mistake or error has been made, and if that error is or failure is rectified, that next year the status review would result in an AA or a UA. So the typical situations would be a new farmer making a rookie mistake, the first time use of equipment that turns out to have not been set up properly, and so there has to be some kind of response, again, outside of the conservation plan to deal with the problems created by the minor technical failure. And then we have the technical assistance code, and that would be used whenever a conservation plan violation is observed while providing technical assistance. Separate from conducting the status review, it would require a correction plan and a review with the next status review. And then the NA code is not applying code, is used when a violation is found during the status review that cannot be addressed with one of the other variances. It will require the use of the Food Security Act or the Farm Services Agency Form 569. FSA does have several exemptions that they can also apply after 569 violation becomes final. So you'll need to be prepared to deal with that. And these are the exemptions that are administered by the Farm Services Agency. They have 4. The economic hardship exemption does not involve NRCS at all, so there's really no need to get involved in trying to figure out what that is, because it's not really covered in our manuals, because we really have nothing to do with that. So they would receive an NA, and then they, in the course of dealing with that, Farm Services Agency would decide if economic hardship could be applied. The second one would be a good faith exemption for highly erodible land conservation provisions, very similar to the wetland conservation good faith. It would involve NRCS completing a similar type form and developing a conservation plan, like we would develop a mitigation plan or restoration plan. So, and then finally, FSA has exemptions for when you have a situation where you have a landowner and then a tenant or some other kind of producer for that. One of them is participating in the programs, and the other one isn't. And the person who isn't in the programs has done something to the farm that creates an HEL or a wetland violation. And so the exemption would be used to allow the program participant to continue to be eligible for participation in the programs, specifically for HEL. This would allow all the other tracks that the program participant operates to be eligible to be in the program. So in this situation, NRCS would do its best to work with both of those people to come up with some type of conservation plan that would meet with the approval of both of those persons. And then all the other tracks of the program participant would, of course, need to be meeting the conservation plan as well. Okay, more words on technical assistance variance. As we said before, this is used when a potential violation is observed while we are on the track providing technical assistance. While it may be possible to discuss this situation with the farmer while you're out there doing the technical assistance, it's probably going to be a better strategy to not discuss it in too much detail, but to return to the office and either make a phone call or write a letter, or on another day make a visit, set up a meeting, come back out to the farm and go over the specific situation that you have concerns about, because we want to, as much as possible, keep these things separate. And if you think it would work out the best, have somebody else go out and deal with the potential violation while you remain active with the technical assistance. And also remember that after you observe a potential violation that might qualify for the technical assistance variance, that any of the other variances can be used and substituted for the TA variance. So that you want to always remember that that is a possible outcome for this. This can get complicated, so don't be reluctant to contact your area staff. Vic Shelton or myself for assistance in making use of this variance. Okay, this is where it gets fun. A complete reading of the Code of Federal Regulations and the National Food Security Act manual make it very clear that the intent of the highly erodible land and the wetland conservation provisions are to allow participants to remain eligible for USDA program benefits whenever possible, as much as possible, and to return as quickly as possible to eligibility when a violation occurs. The goal of all of this, as our mission is for our USDA organization, is to get people into the programs and then keep them there as much as possible. Exclusion from participation in programs is a final act. Only after all applicable plan amendments, status review variances, provision exemptions, and appeals are used as much as possible. So we want to make sure that we don't apply a not applying code when a variance will take care of things. And we don't want to use a variance when we can just amend their plan or add a note that some minor thing will be done differently. Yeah, if there's something going on that is not a regular occurrence, that can be noted and put in the plan, and no further action would need to be made on that. Better to develop a relationship to get conservation on the land than it is to lose a person to ineligibility and have them kicked out of the program because they've done something wrong. Um, the goal is a permanent conservation farmer who wants to work with NRCS, not a farmer looking over their shoulder to see if the NRCS truck is coming down the road by their farm. That can be a little bit frustrating to decide what you're going to do, what exact tact you're going to take. Again, work with your area and state people when you need assistance on that, and make sure you document whatever your decision is and why you made it, and that should cover the system and explain why you're doing what you're doing. Okay, one thing that should not be overlooked is that you will have to review operation and maintenance plans that may be in the folder if they are part of the original conservation plan. And that may include having to go to the site to look at the structure, make sure it's still there and it's working, it's operating in line with its lifespan. and also determine if things need to be done to fix it, make it work again, or keep it in a working condition. This would not include structures or projects that were built without the use of standards and specifications. If they're in the plan, then they should have been done with the use of our standards and specifications. So, um, so when you're reviewing the folder and you see that there are things that need the O&M review, you should be looking for things like needed repairs, needed removal of accumulated sediment, replacement of any failed parts, or components that need to be fixed or replaced, reseeding of acreages. And you might want to think about making a checklist if you keep running into the same kinds of things so that you'll be reminded of what to look at or look for. And if you see that maintenance is needed, then you will need to document what the repairs are that will be needed. You'll need to send written notice to the program participant within 10 days of the status review visit. And that notice should include the corrective action that must be taken. You should discuss any type of financial or technical assistance that's available. This is different from wetlands. If wetland is improperly converted, we cannot use financial assistance to restore the wetland or to create a mitigation site, but we are allowed to use technical assistance for erosion control practices. So that would be available for an HEL violation. And then this would need to be set up so that you would review that tract again next year to make sure that the maintenance was actually carried out. So let's take a look at um, how status review provisions can affect how we work with the farmer during the rest of the year. Congress has set things up very specifically so that there are three ways that we deal with conservation provisions in the use of compliance for potential violations. Um, this is a self-certification program, so the AD 1026 is used, and we use the status reviews. Um, if we see something, um, then we would be required to take action in the following situations. FSA 569 would need to be requested by NRCS if we observe a potential violation while we are providing technical assistance on the farm. And we eventually get to a point in the situation where the TA variance can't be used. The reason it can't be used would be if the person isn't cooperating or they've tried to do something and it's not working and they're not cooperating with making it work. And of course, wetland uh, conversion activities don't qualify for the TA variance. They require immediate action. If you observe it while you're on the farm and you're providing technical assistance. The other situation would be an FSA 569 would be requested by NRCS when we are processing an AD 1026 and we wind up using a CW or CW plus year label. Um, would go ahead and request a 569 while the CW or CW plus year label is going through any appeals process. And then we would complete that form and return it when the CW plus year CW label becomes the final label. And then the third situation would be reports by the public, which we call the whistleblower option. There is a process in the Food Security Act Manual 520.4 that puts out a procedure. This was developed before there was an FSA 569. So now that we have an FSA 569 form, our national leadership and our regional leadership from the Central National Tech Center have advised us to just send the person over to FSA to use the 569 form, and then we would handle that process through the 569 process. So this kind of gets to one thing that we definitely do not do, and that is what we used to call drive-by 569. So Congress has authorized all these different ways of dealing with violation situations. One thing they have not authorized us to do is to request the 569 while we are engaged in non-contact activities. So if we're driving down the road, or if we're working on a farm and we look across the field and look across the property line and see something going on with the neighbor, we are not authorized to pursue a potential violation on those kind of situations. It's the things that we are allowed to do by Congress is very specific and proactive. If we're not told we can do it, then we shouldn't be doing it. We have to have some type of regulatory justification that goes through the formal process that would allow us to do that. So we want to make clear that the NRCS is not a surveillance agency. If you talk with some of the older employees, I mean myself included, I know we used to argue about this all the time on what to do if we see something while we're driving down the road. Now, there's nothing wrong with you stopping and letting the farmer know that, hey, there's something going on here with what you're doing that could cause you potential problems down the road if there's a status review or FSA is measuring your fields or trying to work out why your CLU boundaries have changed. So would you like to talk with me about this now and get things corrected before it becomes an issue? If not, then thank you and have a good day. So that's as close as we can get to doing a cold contact, so to speak, with these people. Okay, so for the specific violation procedure, once you've seen something or you've finished the processing on AB 226, you decide that a 569 is needed, you have 7 calendar days to make that request. And then you have 10 calendar days to notify the people on the form. It's either going to be the 569 or the 1026 within 10 calendar days that they have a potential violation. So this would be when you decide that the technical assistance variance is no longer working, or some of the other variances that you've used aren't working, or that you've had to have done wetland determination, you decide you're going to have to use the CW or the CW plus year label. So you've got 10 calendar days to get that letter to them. You would return the completed 569 to FSA when the determination becomes final. So that would either be 30 days after you make the preliminary determination or whenever the appeals process is used up. So that type of decision making would apply to when a person is not actively applying a conservation plan or system, not using the complete system, including the most protective year. That most protective year needs to be used as required in the rotation. You can't just keep putting it off. Or not using a system that would give you the goal of meeting T or 2T as needed, depending on your situation. The other times you would need to request a 569 would be if you're ever denied access to the tract, or when you spot a wetland conservation provision violation. One interesting aspect is the HEL sodbuster procedure. When a person has converted HEL ground by removing the woody vegetation and they are now farming it, using it for commodity crop production, the way you decide if they've been meeting a conservation system or not on their own is to determine when the field was converted, and then your cropping history from that conversion date to present year. That cropping history would be used to figure out what your values are for each year, and then to figure out if that erosion rate meets the goal of 1T, because it's HEL and it's being converted from native vegetation. So you always got to remember to apply that specific system.
This concludes the status review training. If you have questions on this presentation, please direct those questions to your area resource specialist or to the state compliance specialist. Thank you.